Welcome to the Difficult Conversation training video. As a supervising practitioner or program supervisor, you are likely to be in a situation where you will need to have a difficult conversation with a teacher candidate. This training will address common sticky scenarios and provide guidance on how to approach having a difficult conversation with a teacher candidate. In this training, you will learn strategies to approach a difficult conversation and best practices on facilitating feedback conversations. In the first section, we will review strategies to approach a difficult conversation. The three strategies are structuring the difficult conversation, creating a plan for the location and timing for the conversation, and anticipating reactions from the teacher candidate. You should plan ahead before having the difficult conversation. The first strategy is to structure the conversation. First, ask the student teacher if you can give him or her some feedback. Then identify a positive action. This would be a practice or behavior you saw using low inference evidence. We will look at high and low inference evidence on the next slide. Next, make connections to the CAP rubric. This is important because this is the criteria he or she will be evaluated on. Next, describe the impact of that behavior. Try to tie it to student learning because his or her impact on student learning is a major focus of the CAP. And finally, ask what he or she will do differently. Think about who will do most of the talking. What materials and/or information will you have available? On this slide, there are three examples that show high inference and low inference statements. The first one is on pacing and momentum. So a high inference statement would be, the lesson pace was too slow. A low inference statement would be, did all the students complete the do now at the same time? 4 students finished the do now with time to spare and then engaged in off-task conversation while they waited for you to bring the class together to review the answers. What could you do next time to eliminate off-task behavior? The second example focuses on precision and evidence. A high inference statement would be, you did not demand precision and evidence in student responses. A low inference statement would be, when you were reviewing the answers on the homework, I noticed that you didn't require students to explain how they arrived at their answers. When Tamara asked you to explain answer number 4, you told her the correct answer without explaining it. How can you structure your lesson to ensure students are explaining their thinking? The last example focuses on checking for understanding. A high inference statement would be, you checked for student understanding for some of the class but not all. A low inference statement would be, you cold called on students to give the answers during the guided practice. How do you know whether all the students understood the content? What are some of the ways you could check for understanding so you know that all students understood? The second strategy is to plan the location and time. Where will you choose to hold the meeting? What time of the day will it be? What class period will the teacher be coming from? Planning the time and location to ensure privacy and confidentiality is important. The teacher candidate will be more receptive to constructive feedback if they are in a comfortable and private area. The third strategy is to anticipate the teacher candidate's reaction. Ask yourself, what responses do you expect to receive from the teacher candidate? Why might he or she act in this way? What will you say in return? Is there anything you can do to make the teacher candidate more receptive to the feedback? It is best to be prepared for reactions and have some ideas on how to move the conversation forward. Section 2 of this video focuses on best practices for feedback conversations. Here are 7 practices that we will review on the following slides. Number 1, start off positive. Number 2, remind the teacher candidate of his or her development goals. Number 3, reference specific examples of teaching practice. Give clear examples. Acknowledge interpersonal dynamics. Address questions about lower ratings, and pledge your support. The first practice is to start off positive. For example, you could say, "You have truly been an asset in our classroom, especially by helping Tim understand his math skills and problem solving. These contributions impact our school and Tim's learning. I also want to be sure that you are growing and developing in your instructional skills as well. I have some feedback to share with you that I think could really help you make a big impact on our students." The second practice is to remind the teacher candidate of the CAP criteria and his or her goal. For example, at the beginning of the semester, we established a goal of developing engaging activities. When I observed you today, I saw that the students were initially engaged in the activity, but toward the middle of the lesson, they seemed distracted and off task. The criteria in the CAP is to develop well-structured lessons with challenging, measurable objectives and appropriate student engagement strategies, pacing, sequence, activities, materials, resources, technologies, and grouping. How might you adjust your teaching so that your students are engaged in the lesson? The third practice is to reference specific examples of effective teaching practices. So, for example, the state has developed video exemplars that highlight effective teaching in action and model the criteria in the CAP rubric. The video exemplar for well-structured lessons gives specific examples of how to demonstrate effective teaching, such as implementing engaging activities. I'd encourage you to take a look at their resources and consider how to bring these new practices into your teaching. The fourth best practice for feedback conversations is to give clear examples. For example, you could say, "In this lesson, it was unclear if students knew the purpose of the lesson based on the questions they were asking. Next time, identify and communicate a clear lesson objective for students stating what they will be learning and why. Also, post the objective on the board so students can see it. Introduce the objective at the beginning of the lesson and refer to it as needed throughout." This would give students a clear understanding of the purpose of the lesson. Next, acknowledge interpersonal dynamics. For example, "I know that sometimes it is hard to hear constructive feedback, but I'm here to help and guide you, and I want to be sure I am giving you the information you need to be an effective teacher. Please know my priority is to support your development in these areas." The sixth practice for feedback conversations is to address questions about lower ratings. For example, just as the STAR assessment raises the bar for student learning, the CAP standards set high expectations for student candidates. As you know, these expectations are laid out in the CAP rubric. I believe my ratings reflect these expectations for effective teaching based on the evidence I collected from your observation. I saw students were engaged in the lesson at the beginning, but they became distracted and off task, and that aligns with a needs improvement level based on the language from the CAP rubric, which states, "Develops lessons with only some elements of appropriate student engagement strategies, pacing, sequence, activities, materials, resources, and grouping." The seventh and final practice is to pledge your support to the teacher candidate. For example, Fitchburg State and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education expect the goal for all teacher candidates to be ready to teach on day one. And I'm committed to helping you get there, but we don't expect you to score exemplary right away. If I tell you that you are not quite meeting standards, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are in jeopardy. It means I'm going to work alongside you to give you the support you need to improve in the areas where you're struggling so that you can make it to proficient as quickly as possible. In the last 3 slides, there are common scenarios that supervising practitioners and program supervisors encounter regularly. Please read the scenario and think about how you would respond. The first scenario addresses giving feedback on a content area made by a teacher candidate. So the scenario 1 states, you observe an elaborate hands-on math lesson in a teacher candidate's classroom and notice that the teacher is confusing the terms mean, median, and mode. You note the error during your post-conference and the teacher candidate begins to get very defensive and suddenly cries. How would you respond? In scenario 2, the teacher candidate's lesson goes horribly wrong. The teacher candidate begins each class by asking students what they know about the topic, reviewing past learning, explaining what students are to do, making an assignment, asking students what questions they have, and letting the students work. The same students volunteer ideas, while others are not very attentive and do not volunteer answers. When the student teacher has completed her instruction and students are working on an assignment, she roams the room and helps students with individual problems. However, some of the students ask for help, some finish very quickly, and the rest of the students' work is of poor quality. The early finishers talk, pass notes, walk around the class, and visit other students. Occasionally, a student will engage in a silly behavior behind the teacher candidate's back and make the rest of the class giggle. What feedback will you provide? The final scenario focuses on professionalism. The teacher candidate is late to school most days. He is present in time for the student's arrival, but he always arrives beyond the start of the contractual day. Once the students arrive, he jokes around with the students and most of the class sees him as the fun guy to be around and not as another teacher in the room. How will you address this with the teacher candidate? This concludes our training on difficult conversations. For more information on our licensure programs at Fitchburg State University, please visit our website.